So, hi, Mark. Sales or salees?
Sails, just like the
Sales.
boat. Yeah, just like the boat.
Okay. What was your first computer?
My first computer, um, I guess it was a family computer. So I had an older brother who was, who is 7 years older than me, and we had a BBC Micro or BBC B. I don't know if they were really computers in the rest of Europe, but they were sold in the UK. And I'm 38, so a computer for me back then, I had to put in a cassette
Hmm.
in to load games. And I remember getting magazines with, print 10 and typing those into my computer and watching very, very basic programming language execute. But yeah, that wasn't really something that captivated me. I think it was really when I was in high school and my family got the first internet connection, and we had our 386s and 486s and Pentiums. That when I was on the internet, I started looking at web pages and wanting to build my own web page. And I said to my dad, "Oh, how do I build a web page, Dad?" And obviously he had no idea because this was the dawn of the internet, and he was an accountant.
Hmm.
So I remember I remember learning a lot about computers and about the internet and networking and IP just by creating my first web page and working out what Apache was and Apache HTTP server. So yeah, my first computer was really just watching my brother kind of play games and
Okay.
type things in verbosely. But I think it was really when I was at high school that I really kind of learned a passion for computers, hardware, and side programming.
Okay. So, on the BBC, so you didn't even try, to load BASIC or.
I think I was too young. I
Okay.
was too young to really kind of understand what was happening.
Hmm.
But I can still remember like trying to find out where where I typed something in wrong, why why it wasn't working. But yeah, a bit too young to really kind of dabble much further.
Same here. So, you mentioned Apache, so I assume you used the Linux back then, right?
Well, I did, but this was a long, long time ago. But I think Apache was also available for Windows back then.
Oh, really?
So I think
Okay.
I remember using Linux before I went to university.
Hmm.
I think I used Mandrake Linux. I
Hmm.
think this was
Hmm.
this was the first one that I was exposed to. But for me, it was part of a university course, so it wasn't really as an everyday desktop. I was still very much a Windows user.
Hmm.
But when I did programming and did my coursework, that was all on Linux. So very much a console-based experience. But
Okay. So, back to your first website. So you really enjoyed that, or was it your initial? It sparked your interest towards programming, or what was the
oh yeah, that was really a huge experience for me. Being able to run a server on my machine, and this was just on my local machine on my family computer, and then go to my friend down the road and give him an IP address, and he could see my web page. That blew my brains.
Okay.
That was amazing, and that really there's quite a lot to learn there. There's a lot to learn about running a server, understanding the networking, HTML, and that was probably, I don't know, 14, 15, 16. So yeah, that really interested me. And then I started learning about PHP and MySQL,
Hmm.
um, which was, served me very well. When I went to university, I had a good understanding of databases and, well, not a good understanding, a basic understanding of databases, and a bit of understanding about PHP and loops and if statements and things like that, just enough to kind of write a very basic website.
What I remember at that time, PHP and MySQL, the combo, all the developers back then. I think it was like 2006 or earlier. I think before Rails came out. they try always convince me that we don't need transactions. Why you need transactions? It's just no one needs that. This was all. I cannot understand it because I was in complete different projects, right? The PHP and MySQL project spend their time, building, a shop, internet with shopping cart, and I spent time in insurances or whatever. So for me, it was impossible to do something, without or inconvenient to do something without transactions. And this was I just watched, the entire community. I couldn't understand why they don't need transactions. So this is what do I remember with MySQL and PHP back then.
Yeah, I remember a fantastic open source project called PHP MyAdmin.
Yeah, of course.
Which was just an absolute workhorse. The first thing I ever did was, if I had a server, was install PHP, MySQL, and PHP MyAdmin, and I was still very much learning how to do sort of management tasks and learning about queries and joins and stuff. So that was a real help for me.
It's also a highly secure solution, right?
Yeah, yeah. You wouldn't dream of installing that publicly facing anymore.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
That's how it was for me anyway. Back when I was young.
It's crazy because you started with installing Apache and learning HTML at the same time. So this is way too much. So what I remember is I spent, a few days understanding tables, HTML tables. They were not that easy, because the entire layout back then was table-based. And and it was very easy to break. So I spent a lot of time, formatting TR, TDs and stuff like that. And and I started with HTML first, and then I installed the server. Because I used the Netscape. You used Netscape back then, the Netscape Navigator. And I could just open the HTML, and I built the website, and then I needed Linux in order to run C and C++, and then I got Apache. So this was like the Apache was just there, but understanding HTML, this was the problem.
Yeah, I think my websites were probably even more basic. I think I just had text to start with, and then but yeah, I very much remember laying everything out with tables.
Yeah.
And then, there was
frame sets, right?
Yeah, and there was a Microsoft product called Front Page.
Front Page. This was terrible. That
was terrible. But that was a very good way of doing layouts, which created even more tables behind the scenes.
I think Angular is based on Front Page. This is it. So I think we get lots of trouble with this, but okay. Okay, it's interesting. So and then and why you started PHP?
Yeah, I think it was just the easiest and most kind of accessible thing right at that time. It was very much that bundle of software, which was Linux, PHP, MySQL. It was probably just the most available resource when I was searching on the internet, and yeah, I guess it was probably lucky as well. It was very easy to get started. It's all there's no compilation.
Yeah, sure. But why you wanted to build something with a database in PHP?
Oh, I don't know. I guess I was just dabbling and seeing what other people were building and trying to understand how to make more sophisticated websites and just curiosity. I think curiosity is something that I've been very lucky to have a lot of throughout my life, and has done me well in my career. So kind of just seeing what other people are doing, trying things out.
Okay, and so at the university you just kept doing PHP? I don't believe so, right?
No. So I don't think we didn't do it any PHP at all.
Yeah.
So we started on C++ actually.
Oh.
C++ and then Java.
Really?
And then
nice.
and then Python. And the only language that really ever resonated with me and really was anything that I could really understand and thrive with was Java. The object orientated style, but also the documentation. I think people kind of underestimate how useful JavaDocs and the Java documentation, that and the IDEs as well. Even when I was at university, Eclipse was the king, and NetBeans. I really used to enjoy using NetBeans, and it's just such a fantastic environment to work in. And I could not get my head around C++ and Python. Never really was an enjoyable experience for me. I don't know why that was so different, but yeah, Java was always something that I was always wanting to use in all my coursework.
Interesting. So, back to JavaDoc. What I'm really impressed with is if you look at the oldest JavaDocs, how string is documented. This is a great documentation from day one. So you won't find, another project from that time. So it's so well documented. So kudos to the engineers. I would say it's just incredible. So sometimes clients ask me, how they should write Java docs. Like look at a string class in Java, for instance. This is what I would expect,
Yeah,
So just
absolutely.
this is what I'm really surprised by the quality of JavaDoc. And
Yeah, I remember I can't remember if it was maybe Java 1.4 when a lot of the new collections came out, and
1.2.
Reading Josh Block's fantastic comments for all the collections was fantastic.
Okay.
So yeah, definitely, I have definitely looked back at those when I've tried to write my own documentation. It's very high standard, but you can try.
Yeah, but you started with JDK 1.1 then, I think, right? Because
So my first Java, I remember using vectors and then changing to
then was 1.1 Java util vector with synchronized and then
So that was my first experience. I remember changing from vectors to lists and sets and things like that. But yeah, my memory is a bit foggy back then.
No problem. But it was at university, or was it later?
Yeah, that was at university.
Okay.
Yeah.
And interesting, because you had, PHP experience and you still like Java. So this is an unusual path. I have to admit, I never ran anything with PHP, I think, so far. I didn't like the syntax. The same is true for Python. I would really like to learn Python now, just for fun, but I don't like the syntax. It doesn't look right for me. So if I look at Python code, I don't know. I know it will change. You have to start, look at the code and then will change. But if I look at this, first, okay, this doesn't look right. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, PHP I think it was just the easiest thing to see visually.
Yeah.
And then, ever since I've never done any any front end work since. I'm very much favouring back end work, and that's still what I'm most passionate about nowadays. I have great respect for front end programmers. I think it's a very difficult area to work in. It's so changeable. But yeah, for me, as soon as I got onto back end programming and working with databases, that's where I was much more comfortable and enjoyed a lot more.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time with JSPs, which are similar to PHP, but now it's over, I would say. I spend all my time in the backends because, in the frontends, I do just web components in JavaScript, complete different story. But in the backend is just, plain Java. Okay, so what happened after university? So you started to work as a Java consultant, or?
Yeah, so I was pretty lucky that I got a job at a fantastic company called William Hill, which is a gambling company in the UK. And I was there for a long time. I was there for 9 years.
Okay.
And the company went through a huge amount of change over that time, but I was very lucky to follow a number of different teams through my career, and each one of them had a fantastic group of experienced developers that I could learn from. So I still think back on some of the programmers that I learned from, and they really taught me a lot. And I was very fortunate to have a really fantastic kind of early junior developer experience. but I maybe stayed there a little bit too long, and was a bit too comfortable. So, after I left that role, I joined a smaller company where I had a lot more freedom, and I think I had 3 promotions in 2 years. So I went from a junior to kind of a mid, and then a senior, and then a team lead. So that that kind of showed me how much I had learned, and compared to the market, I was actually a lot more experienced than I thought I was.
Okay.
And that also did me well, actually jumping out of my comfort zone. And whenever I've done that in my career, that's always been a positive experience. And maybe that's luck, or maybe that's good preparation. I'm not sure, but it's something that I've become aware of. Now I'm getting a bit older, and trying to be present of mind and make sure that I am looking at the next thing, and trying to push myself a bit more than maybe I used to.
Yeah, which is important, but it's also important to be able, to ignore things, because there are so many, crazy technologies, which I'm spending a lot of time on Java conferences, where I say, okay, looks nice, and but who cares, right?
Oh.
And you get 3% improvement with 100% rewrite, and this for me was just crazy. Yeah.
Well, this is my current experience. So currently I work for Amazon Web Services, and I've been there over 3 years now, which, may not seem like a long tenure for a lot of people, but that at AWS is actually quite a long tenure, and I've probably been there a lot longer than a lot of my peers.
Okay.
And, if you think of a company like AWS, if you're not careful, you can easily, be pulled from one side to the next every single day. There is so many different opportunities to be involved in so many incredible projects. But, time is finite, and, you need to, in my experience, have time to dive deep and to understand things well. So in the last year, I've really been very interested in a book called Essentialism.
Okay.
And maybe we can link this
I will.
in the blog post. And this was recommended to me by a manager at AWS. And he saw that I was, being pulled around lots of different topics. And I wasn't having, maybe the impact that I could have been having as a solutions architect, which is the job role that I do. So he recommended this, and this book preaches, understanding, what you're trying to achieve, and having a very single threaded direction. And there might be a number of different areas on that topic that you're interested in, but trying not to be distracted by things, like you say, that are less meaningful. And that's really helped me this year. And that maybe is a good segue, because this year I have really been trying to understand the Java developer experience when people are using some of the services at AWS. So in particular, AWS Lambda is one that I'm really interested in. That's a service that I specialize in, and I work with a lot of customers to understand Lambda and to adopt Lambda. And because I have a Java background, and Java is something that I'm really interested in, that sort of combination means that I get to speak to some really interesting companies, large and small, about how to adopt and to learn about Lambda.
Okay, interesting. So, and before AWS, you spent your time on the backend with Java. So you built servers. Which technologies you used?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my first role at William Hill was what we called a build engineer. I guess nowadays you'd probably call it an ops engineer. But I was building servers out for different environments, installing and configuring WebLogic.
Okay.
I don't remember that. WebLogic 6.
Yeah, 6 to 8. So 6, 7, 8 were great releases. I really enjoyed them. And after that, it got bloated and worse. This was my experience.
Yeah. So configuring those environments and setting those up for engineers, and then taking their code, deploying it to the clusters, and making sure that all ran correctly with all the different various scripts that we could produce to help them, but also to help them diagnose their own problems, because they didn't have the sort of local development environment that people probably expect to have these days. So yeah, that was very much a learning experience for me, and helping developers understand the mistakes that we're making, which kind of led me to want to do more and more programming myself. So I moved into a programming role, pure backend Java, learning about Spring framework, going to various training sessions. And then, the general move, I think, which was probably very familiar to a lot of people, to Tomcat, and then to Jetty. I think that's probably something that a lot of people did at that sort of time. And various different databases, Oracle, Postgres.
So you spend your time with Spring, Jetty, and Tomcat, basically, right, in the backend?
Yeah.
Why I'm asking is because recently I delivered a talk like EJB developers. Now it's time to learn Lambda. I don't know whether you saw this. And I don't know whether you know EJBs actually? You heard about
No, it was never really something that was in my professional career. No, I heard about it, but I think I just missed it.
Yeah, no problem, because they fade away, so they will get replaced with CDI and other technologies. But the interesting part is that the stateless EJBs are very similar to synchronous Lambda, and the asynchronous EJBs is called message-driven beans, are very similar to the usual Lambda without API gateway. And what I did, I just I picked the old specs from EJBs. But because back then there was like a cold start, there was pooling, Java was so slow back then that this new was too slow. So we had pre-cache or pre-pool EJBs. And so it's very similar to cold start. The concurrency is almost identical. So if you So, and what I did, the session was scheduled to 1 hour, but I get more questions. It was 1.5 hours. And what I did, I just explained now which problem we had in with EJBs and now Lambdas. And there's only one difference, or only one conceptual difference, because Lambdas are running in separate containers concurrently, and EJB ran inside the JVM. So the Java static has different meaning in Lambda and in EJBs. This is the only big difference. And it was quite interesting because for me it's not very easy to map my old concepts to Lambdas. Like throttling the Lambdas for me was max pool size 2 in EJBs. So I exactly knew there would be never more like 2 ongoing transactions, concurrent transactions. In Lambda I can do the same. So and this was what and everyone's surprised, because I joked a little bit, hot technology like EJBs, you can also learn Lambdas, but it was fun. It was actually funny sessions, and I got lots of questions. And I think after the session, you pinged me on Twitter, and I thought you attended the session, because your tweet was very very related to my session, so it was actually funny, And you ask about the Java world in developer experience. So I think the problem with Lambda is it was overhyped in the Java community. And people thought that if you have a monolith, you can split monolith in 200 Lambdas and everything is going to be better. If you do this, it is terrible. So I was completely against that. I said, okay, forget about this. I mean, this doesn't make any sense. So such a monolith, you could just, ship on ECS Fargate, for instance. It works just perfectly. And but I would say with Lambdas and API gateway is a nice transition, I would say, to something more interesting, like event-driven architectures, right? Where Lambda just listens to events and does something with it. And now it comes, what I really like is you can actually, this is also not well understood, I think. You can ship just plain Java POJOs without any dependency to Amazon APIs is just a method. And the only dependency is that, the JSON structure. And you can test it you can write unit tests, you can do everything locally. And this is what I try to show a little bit, because otherwise I will spend in my project, I'm consultant, all the time try, to revert back things which are suboptimal, I would say.
Yeah, there is so much to say there. If you have an existing Java application, and that is not magically gonna be converted into a series of Lambda functions. That is part of a migration, just like anything. That's part of a modernization journey. And there's so many ways that you can go about that. So one that I think is really good is, if you have an application that's maybe on EC2, behind a load balancer, if you're using application load balancer, the AWS service, that can do path-based routing. So if you have a REST API that's being served by a Java application, you can start taking separate paths and targeting Lambda functions. So you can start an easy migration, and the technical part of the migration is one part, but it's the cultural and learning the technology from the staff on the team, and learning how to operate and release the code. So it's not running to start with is a very good approach, and actually learning by walking and jogging, and finding what works for you, and not just following what people write on blog posts, I think is a good idea. But yeah, like you mentioned, API Gateway, another fantastic service, really helps you to work on that migration. And in the same way, you can take different paths and target different services. So that's another really good way of bringing in Lambda while you've still got a working application, so that you're not introducing more risk to the project.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to mention, actually, this ALB is nice, but you will need API Gateway anyway, with the proxy integration, to translate the HTTP events to Lambda events. So I think if you have an EC2 system, you could use API Gateway as a facade to both. And
well, you can take ALB events in Lambda as well. So you don't necessarily need API Gateway. You can just receive the events straight from ALB.
Okay. This is interesting then. But in one point of time, if everything is migrated, I will migrate to API Gateway. It wouldn't make any sense to use ALB for Lambdas, right?
So, some people really like ALB because it gives you, less functionality than API Gateway. So there is probably a different cost profile. But if you're producing a public API, then you probably are going to appreciate the feature set of API Gateway.
Yeah.
So things like throttling,
stages,
usage plans, stages. But there are a lot of people who are building, microservices and use application load balancer just to load balance, internal microservices. So that's a very common pattern as well.
Okay, that's interesting, because for me it was the path, use API Gateway and then migrate the traffic to Lambda, and then you start with proxy integration, and then one of my clients will probably even use API keys from API Gateway, because they're building commercial software, and how it's called, IP ranges. With API Gateway, you can say you can only be called from this IP addresses, which is, it is very simple to configure, actually.
Yeah. So that's called a resource policy, and that is a fantastic way of very simply adding, what we would call like a firewall, firewall rules. And that is still very prevalent in the security world for on-premises style workloads. So, we would like to move away into, different security mechanisms, but that is still very common. And API Gateway is a fantastic way of allowing, specific API ranges into your API.
And as I already mentioned, this API gateway integration is nice for synchronous services where you need something like a REST endpoint. But what is really changes in the cloud is, I would say, all the major services are emitting events. So we already mentioned ALB, API Gateway HTTP event, but S3 as well. Let's say S3, Kinesis, SNS, SQS, and so forth. But S3 is actually the most interesting one because what I saw on premise, there are lots of projects, application servers in my world, which are scanning folders and waiting until file arrives. If the file is there, it is virus scanned and then just translated to something else. And migration to cloud from there is just uploading a file to S3, then waiting for an event to happen, and then translating the event. And what changes is in Java world on premise, event-driven architectures. We are talking about this for 10 years on conferences, but you don't have any events on premise. It doesn't make any sense, to build event-driven architectures without events. So you will force yourself to emit the events and in order to receive them. But in the clouds, you already have the events. So I would say the killer use case for Lambda is just listen to events. And then you have one method like a facade in Lambda. So it receives, the event, then translates the event to a business event because you always get JSON. So you translate to POJOB to regular Java object. And from there, it's just, code which we wrote, written in JDK 1.1. So it was like just POJOBs, no dependency injection, no annotation, just straight code. And this is the I would say, cloud native. Because there were lots of talk about cloud native Java and they will and everyone was lucky. Then they started something in their container, and I look at that as okay. I don't care whether it runs on the cloud or not. It will run in the cloud. But now we are using the cloud, right?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point, and the cloud and AWS really is built as a set of APIs. And a set of services, and all of those services emit information. So if you want to know when a build is finished, a build emits an event, so you can listen to when that build is finished. If you're using an EC2 server, you will get events when the server is started and stopped and paused. You can easily and you will fall over yourself, with the amount of events that you can possibly consume. But also, I think the other really interesting thing about Lambda and event-driven architecture is the integrations that we have. So if you're using something like Kafka or ActiveMQ or RabbitMQ or some of the cloud-native queues like Kinesis, SQS, and SNS, they all have integrations, native integrations into Lambda, so you don't need to write any of the polling code. Now, maybe that polling code for RabbitMQ or ActiveMQ wasn't particularly difficult, but if you're writing, sophisticated production code for Kafka and holding offsets, that isn't trivial, and for Lambda to manage that for you is actually, I think, a real benefit to a lot of people who are building those sorts of systems. So you can provision a Kafka cluster, associate that to a Lambda function, and you will just receive events from that stream, and you don't have to write that integration code. I think that's a real benefit. It really gets people productivity increases.
By the way, the Kafka recently became serverless on AWS.
Yes.
And this is actually great news because for experimentation, I always started, two small brokers. So you can actually start with two, and they are really cheap. But now it's even better serverless. So I can say, okay, I need it now for half an hour, implementation, and then can just shut it down. So this is actually great news. And and Kafka or Kinesis, this is the cost profile. So both are interesting. What we are usually doing, or I'm proposing, is using Event Bridge as a facade. So very similar to API Gateway, because then are a little bit more flexible. And Event bridge, we have to be careful because we had in Java ESBs, and this was not a nice experience. So, but event bridge is not. It's just simpler. So you get the events and you can route the events to whatever source you have. So it is like more like switch statement in Java, I would say, flexible one, and this basically it. And we use it actually for, you mentioned Kafka, another interesting integration. We have a Kafka on premise. And Kafka is a persistent. So what you can actually do is you can read, the Kafka events on premise and submit them to the cloud. And what we could, of course, do is to synchronize Kafka to Kafka. But who knows whether, Kafka is the best solution in the cloud. So, but if you use Event Bridge, then you have the choice, to use Kinesis, SQS, SNS, or whatever. So you are not, I like Kafka, but why to be depending on Kafka? And this works surprisingly well, I have to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. And EventBridge has had some incredible releases recently. So, being able to store and replay, so that you can store the messages into S3, so, very low cost persistent storage, and then replay those messages back. So I've worked in CQRS style and event sourcing style applications. That gives me some of the functionality that I really want to and end up building myself if I'm building systems like that. So having that built for me, managed for me, and having APIs to replay messages is a fantastic feature.
Yeah. This is comparable to GMS persistent queues, actually, what you are talking about. Because what this means is that if Event Bridge receives an event, it will store it immediately in S3 and then try to redeliver this event, right? Read from S3 and redeliver it.
Oh, so typically it will just send those messages to whichever endpoints are associated. Yep. But if you have some sort of failure, or if you have a new system that wants to receive old messages, you can take those old messages and push them through the system again.
Yeah, you're right. So what EventBridge would do, we just send event, there is something for you, and I would just, read it from S3 then. So it's not like, yeah.
No, it will produce the messages back onto EventBridge.
Yeah, but, the payload of the message would be a link to S3, right? An ID of the S3 bucket.
No, it would just be the same message that...
so it uses S3 transparently then? Yes. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So I think you will get an identifier that this has been a redrive.
Okay.
But the message will look the same. It will have the same contents.
That's great, because I think it works the same like S3 events, where you get the event, but there is the link to the actual bucket, so you can receive that. Okay, interesting. Back to Lambda. What's also interesting is how good actually the cold starts are, or how short. With Java. So if you have like a Pojo Lambda, so my observation is under a second, actually. If you have no dependencies Lambdas, which is also not widely known, I would say. And with the Quarkus, which is like, I spend lots of my time with Java E, Jakarta E, and now Microprofile, and lots of my clients have such applications. So what you can do right now is to package the entire application as a Lambda. And if you do it with Quarkus, with dependency injection and microprofile config, it's still surprisingly fast. So the very first call with 512, I think, max of RAM, which is like a quarter of a CPU, it is like half a second. And all the 3 seconds complete call start, but 1 second for Quarkus. But then subsequent calls are milliseconds. It's like 8 milliseconds, 10 milliseconds, which is genius. And also what I observed, that actually the call starts are not that frequent. Of course, it depends, on the region and the RAM settings, but I mean, it is way better than I suspected.
Yeah, so this is very much something that I speak to customers about when they're researching Lambda and Java. There is a lot of information out there about cold starts, and a lot of people really, like to add to that content. But the first thing that I would ask a customer to do is to write a meaningful load test, because with that meaningful load test, they can actually see the likelihood and the amount and scale of cold starts. And it's only then that I think people really appreciate how fast the system is. As a developer, you are always going to get the worst experience, unfortunately, because you're gonna be building new code. You upload it, you execute it on Lambda, you will get a cold start guaranteed. You make a change, you upload another version, you get a cold start guaranteed because it's a new version. So you will always get the worst impression. And as a developer, you need to understand that that is the case. But as soon as you put, load through the system, you will get so much reuse, and Lambda is not immediately shutting down Java after a single use. It persists, and you get that incredible performance benefit from Java, and that's really fantastic. So if you are trying Lambda for the first time, and you are hitting cold starts, be aware that is the worst case scenario, and put a few hundred requests a second through the system. It'll cost you virtually nothing, and you'll really see how Lambda scales and how performant it is.
So another thing is, as already mentioned, in the case of Quarkus, you can actually test the entire application locally because there's nothing Lambda specific. So we are using JAX-RS and the microprofile API. So in Quarkus, you can just do Maven Quarkus :dev, and you can just run it. And then if you decide what I use CDK and push it to Amazon and perform an integration test, which is completely fair to have a cold start. And the next step is going to have AWS pipeline or code build and code deploy to have automated deployment. And then I really don't care about the cold start because I just push my code. The pipeline wakes up and ships the Lambda. There's a short test and it just works. So and the other Lambdas, so this we talk right now with the synchronous Lambdas, and the asynchronous Lambdas is even better because you can just use JUnit. So you don't, because this is just a plain Java code. It looks like JDK 1.1.1.2. There is no magic. So there is nothing, And I don't know about you, but I really don't like mock AWS services. I know you could, run a Lambda locally and mimic the entire. You can download DynamoDB locally. I never did it, and I don't like it. So if I work with the cloud, I always push as often as possible to the cloud, and I will always, test in a real system. So what I do, I have multiple accounts. I have one test account and then one client account. So I test in my pre-stage account, and then if it works, I just switch the credentials or the entire profile, and push to my clients. This is how I am working, and it works well. So I don't know whether this is the intended way, but at least it works.
Yeah. So I'm never going to say that working locally using mock services is bad. The thing is, you need to understand the limitations, I think. So whenever you have a local mimic or mock or whatever you want to call it, that is a limited subset of functionality that is delivered by the cloud. So you just have to be aware that things aren't going to be perfect. So you might have authorization problems, or you might have scaling that you need to be aware of, or any number of different things. But I'm definitely on your side. On the development cycles, that's what I do. So I unit test locally, and then I push to the cloud, and I do my integration tests on the cloud. And that for me works really well. There are some third-party and AWS products that are looking at improving that development cycle. So one, I don't know if you're familiar. It's not CDK, but there's another model called SAM, which is the serverless application model. And with SAM, you can use the SAM CLI to swap out your Lambda function code when you make code changes without doing a full CloudFormation redeploy. So that's called SAM Accelerate. That's something that's pretty new. That's in the last few months. So that really is looking to really shorten that development cycle for when you're doing integration tests. That's really interesting to look out for. And I think there's some other third parties that are doing very similar things, but that is kind of bridging the gap.
Yeah. And SAM Accelerate also works with Java?
Yes.
Okay, interesting. So never tried that. This is SAM. Is this what Quarkus produces? So if you add the AWS Lambda REST API extension, then you get the SAM templates generated by Quarkus. They're optional, so you can use them SAM or not. But yeah. Back to
but
CDK.
you mentioned CDK, and I think CDK is where I am most excited because as a Java developer, I can write Java code to describe my infrastructure.
Yeah.
And yesterday was the AWS reInvent keynote for developers from Werner Vogels. Mm-hmm. And he had a guest speaker from Liberty Mutual, and he was giving his experience of CDK and how they have adopted CDK widely and are producing very specific constructs for their organization. So they are producing, best practice templates that include all of the security and ways of working into their own constructs so that other teams can adopt the same ways of working and the same best practices more quickly.
Are you using Java?
Yeah. I think they use a range of languages. I don't think they said specifically in the talk which languages they use.
Because with Java, this is the interesting part. If you mix CDK with Java, what do you get? You get Maven. And with Maven, you get Nexus repository. So this means this is a huge deal. So I didn't watch the keynote yet, but will do. But what we are doing, we are actually shipping constructs as Maven projects. And if you say Maven clean install, it installs locally, so you can test it already. But if you say Maven deploy and you specify the Nexus repository, then it's in the repository. And right now I'm helping a few startups with the cloud. And what we did, we started, this is a migration project. So we will start with a Fargate and a few Lambdas. So they already want to have Lambdas, but it's a longer way. So we cannot just split the monolith to Lambdas. But what we did is we've wrapped the already, how it's called, load balanced AWS Fargate pattern. So this is the highest construct in CDK with our own construct, like a nice builder pattern. Because what you can do with Java, you can say new cluster, add task, add task, add task, and you're just adding, your images, image names, and behind the scenes you can create ECR repositories. You can prepare everything, and in Java this is like 5 lines of code, and you are done. And if you ship it, if you push it to Maven, the other project developer, they just include it as a dependency. And they have their own stack, and it just works. I would say it's not even about best practice. It is time saving.
Yeah,
and this is huge. And I mean, I'm really surprised that there was nothing in the internet about Java and CDK. So I started a little bit, and the response is huge. And I said, this is strange. And everyone uses strange languages, and in Java with Maven is unbeatable. Java with Maven is unbeatable, I would say, because everyone recognized that how great Maven with the versioning actually is, and all the companies already have Nexus or JFrog or whatever, even GitHub. It is very easy to share, and this is already completely in the corporate, included infrastructure, right?
Yeah, I would love to, see more and help more and work with other framework developers to really advance CDK and some of the other imagine going on to the Quarkus start page or the Spring start page and being able to get a CDK project with your starting application. Mm-hmm. If you could get your starting application and your starting infrastructure code written in CDK, not only would you be able to build your application, quickly using Maven, but also then to deploy it to AWS, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
And, give people those rest endpoints in a single click. That would be fantastic.
Yeah. Most of my clients, they are working with isolated subnets or VPCs with direct connect or whatever. And I, of course, don't have direct connect. I'm just a singleton consultant. But what I can simulate a direct connect is with VPN. So what I do for myself, I have several constructs which create, VPC with subnets and VPN. Then I have stacks which create the endpoints. Otherwise you need endpoints for S3, which makes sense, and ECR and ECR API stuff like that, and huge time server, right? So I looked at what the solution in the internet, and I say, okay, this is. I don't know why I should do that, right? And now it is working, and I'm improving it constantly. I'm versioning for myself, and then I have my building blocks. They are a little bit ugly, so if I have sometimes I will just generalize them, but it works way better than expected actually. And this is what I did with Quarkus. Also, I'm deploying Lambda with Quarkus, and the only thing is I still know what you said, packaging both. This is a little bit harder because if you think about this, what you usually have, you will need more layers. So you need to know like a base layer with the VPC and the networking. So this is the first layer. You cannot just ship, VPC with Quarkus microservice because you get too many VPCs. So we have to be a little bit more intelligent. I think this is the challenge, but it's more or less obvious. I would say a mid-range microservice, you would get an ECR with a microservice, a one-to-one relation, I would say. Now, the first question is if this is Fargate, we have a service with tasks, how many tasks per service, or is it a multiple Fargate clusters? So we need a language first, how to do it. But I'm with you, and I really like CDK. This is, I call it, no YAML deployment. For me as Java developer is great. And what I really like is actually CloudFormation. And I tell you why. I mean, behind the scenes. What's really great is with CDK, so just feedback, so there is no state on my machine. Mm-hmm. So it is shared from day one. And this is a huge problem with the other solutions because what you have to do first is, to share your state somewhere. So you will have to set up GitHub or S3 or whatever. And with CDK Java, what happens, you have to do CDK bootstrap. So, okay, that's the very first time. And then you get your stack. And you have also conventions. If you have a nice CDK names in Java, you get nice stack names. So you see the one-to-one relation. But even if you delete your local environment, you can go to AWS console, to CloudFormation stacks, click on the project and just delete everything, This is, or you can detect drifts if someone tries, does something with it, and I would say this is what I appreciate. But there's almost, I don't know, as from Java perspective, it's almost no material, right? So which is interesting. So I'm glad that you are actually working on this, at least someone,
Absolutely. So everything I do and everything I publish is always Java and Java CDK. So if you follow the thread of the work that I'm doing, you'll always find CDK. It's definitely what I'm most interested in, and I'm always advocating that to the customers that I work with, unless there's a very specific other reason. But yeah, if you're part of an organization, it's just such a fantastic way to share code, and it's probably not something that I don't think has been done that much before. I don't, if I think back in my career, I don't see that in the same way. I think this is a really new, different way of working. And I think it will get more and more sophisticated. So yeah, if you are shipping higher level constructs, I think there's also a design aspect to that, allow people to specify their own VPCs and subnets, and, allow people to design it to their environment, but still add in all that extra value by making that abstraction. I think there's a lot of really cool space to innovate there.
Mm-hmm. What's different this time is that if you look at AWS resources, there's a clear API, and these are the same resources for all projects and clients. So what it means, such a construct is highly reusable. So there is no difference in a VPC or Fargate for client A and client B. So what we got in Java the first time, something which is highly reusable. So if you build such a construct, maybe you will miss a parameter or something, so you can extend that, but you can absolutely reuse it. And all other attempts in reuse something in Java, they often failed because a customer from one department is not identical to customer from another department of a company, because the attributes are completely different. But now, because the schema of the REST APIs of Amazon Cloud is standardized, so my constructs are highly reusable across all clients, all departments, all projects. So, and this is the huge difference. This is why it is actually a killer use case to create a construct, push it to Nexus or Maven repository and reuse it, which is not true for other projects. So I have to say I'm against reuse in Java because it's not worth. Developers are they like to create reusable loggers or whatever, and it never worked in the past. But this one, you get maybe you created one day properly something from scratch. If you do something from scratch in Amazon, you have to know IAMs, you have to know the security groups. And I spent countless nights, I would say, just because something didn't work. And with CDK, it happens behind the scenes. So most of the higher level construct will create the IAM policies for you. They will create the security groups. You see what happens afterwards. It's also great learning effect. If something doesn't work, you can use CDK. Say, okay, look, this should work this way.
Yeah, and think of like a highly regulated industry. So maybe a banking or some sort of medical field. They can have specific constructs that align to their specific security requirements. So instead of making an S3 bucket and trying to understand what security you need for that S3 bucket, having a company specified bucket configuration with the security team's stamp of approval, so you don't have to learn that, and you don't have to go to the security team and ask them to verify that this is okay. But actually get the construct from the security team, use it, and then that just seems like such an improved way of working to me.
Yeah, and if regulated. So right now I'm working for critical infrastructure, I would call it, startups. This is also a little bit problematic field because it has to be highly available and secure and so forth. But even more trivial things. Just imagine a Quarkus application and Aurora database. What you can do with a construct, you can have two stacks, and you can generate even users and passwords on the fly of a database and inject them as secrets to Quarkus fully automatically. So this is this is one of the common questions in my projects. What I'm doing with secrets? Am I using HashiCorp vaults, or I'm using Kubernetes secrets? And I say, or we just we can use KMS or even parameter store as also encrypted, and do it automatically. So we can have highly secure way. Of course, you will need the credentials later for your console or for debugging purposes, but you can still create another user, right? So and this is time saver again. So it is security, but it's also convenient. And back then we had no security and a lot of inconvenience. This was the problem, and with that there's no fiddling. So I'm glad you also see it this way. My impression was like, Amazon is not that interested in CDK. They just did it because they could. But I'm glad that you are also behind.
No, I think it is very, very well regarded. If you see how many versions are being pushed, I think it's almost daily.
Yeah.
I think version 2, which is the second major version, is now either in preview or GA.
I'm only using 2 the entire time because what's really nice with version 2, you get just one dependency. You don't have to include everything with version 1. So I'm using V2 all the time. I have to be a little bit behind because if you use the recent version, you get the schema version conflict. So I think 5 versions behind or something like this. But I'm just waiting for the release.
Yeah, I think if people used CDK in the early days, I think they might have been burnt by some like early breaking changes. But that is very different now. It is a very, very a solid productivity tool, and I would definitely recommend people to look at it. So if you're thinking of trying it, CDK stands for Cloud Development Kit. Loads of interesting resources. Yes, you can use other languages. Obviously, we're talking about Java, but it also comes from a lot of other flavors. But it's a fantastic tool, and it isn't just specific for Lambda or API Gateway. It covers a huge amount of the AWS estate. So you can use it for Lambda and API Gateway, but you can also use it for all or virtually all of the AWS services that are available. And there's a lot of development there, a lot of people innovating in that area.
Is it actually true? I just look at that it covers whatever CloudFormation covers because it's generated from CloudFormation, or are there services which are covered by CloudFormation but not CDK? You know it?
So I guess you would think of it as a downstream consumer. So CDK uses CloudFormation, and the way CloudFormation works from a language point of view. There is like a master template, and then the languages are auto-generated from that template. So that's why we don't have language drift between the different versions. But yeah, you wouldn't have something in CDK which wasn't available in CloudFormation.
Yeah. And as a cliffhanger for next time, so we can spend more time talking about CDK, but how it works in Java. So it is basically what you do in Java. You're building, your hierarchy with most happens in a constructor. And if you package with Maven, this is also one of the common questions. If you do package, what happens? Nothing. You get just the JSON. So the entire Java structure serializes to CloudFormation template with some environment. And there's, and then the environment is sent with CDK deploy to the cloud. So this is what happens behind the scenes. This was great. I would say I would really like to have you back to talk more specifically about Java and the cloud, so we can pick a topic. And I will put your and greetings to your manager. Seems like a great person with the book. So really great advice. Focus on something, and I try to focus on standards. So don't be distracted. Just follow whatever Java does, and served me also well over the years, and I still enjoy it. So where people can find you? Do you have a resource Twitter, blog? And what's your official official role at Amazon? So you are solutions.
So my official role is a specialist solutions architect. So there are architects who cover the vast array of AWS services, but I'm kind of lucky that I just get to specialize in a few. So I typically specialize in API Gateway, Lambda, SNS, SQS, Event Bridge, and step functions. So the services that are serverless, but also the services that are used quite a lot by builders and developers to build systems. So that's kind of my sweet spot. You can find me on Twitter. So my Twitter handle is marksales3. I'm sure we can put a link somewhere.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, that's where I post a lot of my content and what I'm working on and what I'm thinking, and asking for feedback. Because feedback is really important and part of the culture at AWS. So yeah, if you're having a bad day and something's not working, feel free to ping me and let me know.
Okay, perfect. So thank you, and see you next time.
See you later. Bye.